February 14th, 1929, Valentine's Day. But there was no love in the air that morning in Chicago. Instead, a chilling discovery awaited. Inside a seemingly nondescript garage on North Clark Street, 7 men lay brutally murdered, their bodies riddled with bullets, slumped against a wall. It was a scene ripped from a nightmare, a shocking tableau of violence that would forever scar the city's history. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder, a silent testament to the unspeakable horror that had unfolded just hours before. This wasn't just another gangland hit in a city already notorious for its Prohibition-era lawlessness. This was different. The sheer audacity, the methodical execution, the cold-blooded precision, it screamed a message of dominance, of absolute power. Chicago was a battleground, a brutal chessboard where figures like Al Capone and Bugs Moran waged a silent, deadly war for control of the illicit liquor trade. But even in this violent landscape, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre stood apart. It was a crime so audacious, so public, yet shrouded in such impenetrable mystery that it captivated the nation and baffled investigators for decades. Who pulled the triggers? Who orchestrated this bloodbath that shattered the morning peace and forever changed the face of American organized crime? And why, despite the infamy, did justice never truly arrive for these 7 fallen men? Join us as we meticulously peel back the layers of time, venturing deep into the smoky back rooms and dangerous streets of Prohibition-era Chicago to reconstruct the true story behind one of history's most chilling cold cases. Prepare to witness a narrative of betrayal, ambition, and an enduring mystery that continues to haunt us today.
Imagine a city not just alive, but practically humming with a dangerous, forbidden energy. A city where the law was a whisper and power screamed from the barrel of a gun. This was Chicago in the 1920s, a decade roaring with jazz, flapper dresses, and a dark secret: Prohibition. It was supposed to clean up America, to bring morality back. Instead, it birthed an empire of illicit booze and a brutal new breed of kings, the gangsters. The stroke of a pen, the passage of the Volstead Act outlawed alcohol, and unwittingly, it handed the keys to untold fortunes to men who operated outside the law. Suddenly, what was once an everyday pleasure became a precious commodity, and those who could supply it held immense power. Speakeasies bloomed like poisonous nightshade across the city, their hidden doors opening to a world of forbidden revelry. But behind the glitz and the clandestine clinking of glasses, a deadly struggle for control was brewing. The streets of Chicago transformed into a chessboard where rival factions moved their pieces, not with knights and bishops, but with Tommy guns and ice picks. At the heart of this brewing storm stood a figure whose name would become synonymous with ruthless ambition and organized crime: Alphonse Al Capone. A Brooklyn-born Italian-American, Capone wasn't just a criminal. He was a shrewd businessman, a master manipulator, and a charismatic, albeit terrifying leader. From his headquarters in the South Side, he meticulously built his empire, a vast network of breweries, distilleries, speakeasies, and gambling dens. His control wasn't just about money. It was about fear, loyalty, and an unshakable belief in his own dominance. To cross Capone was to sign your own death warrant. His Southside Italian gang, a disciplined and brutal force, ensured his word was law in his domain. But Chicago was too big, too lucrative for one man to control entirely. Standing defiantly in Capone's path was another formidable force: George "Bugs" Moran. An Irish-American, Moran was a different kind of gangster, perhaps less flamboyant than Capone, but no less cunning or violent. He had taken the reins of the North Side gang after the assassination of its previous leader, Dean O'Banion, and act widely, though never provenly attributed to Capone's machinations. Moran was a survivor, a street fighter who harbored a deep, burning hatred for Capone. He saw Capone not just as a rival, but as an affront to his territory, his pride, and the very fabric of his North Side empire.
His gang, comprising tough, hardened men, was equally prepared to fight for every inch of turf. The city became a battlefield, carved up by an invisible line that separated Capone's South Side from Moran's North Side. But that line was constantly being redrawn in blood. This wasn't a gentleman's agreement. It was an all-out war for supremacy, for the staggering profits that flowed from illegal alcohol, gambling, and prostitution. Drive-by shootings became chillingly common. Car bombs were the new form of political debate, and bodies, often riddled with bullets, were grim reminders of the stakes involved. Each attack, each murder was a calculated move, a message sent, a score settled, but always, always a provocation. Moran's men targeted Capone's breweries. Capone retaliated by hitting Moran's speakeasies. The cycle of violence escalated relentlessly, fueled by vengeance and the insatiable thirst for absolute control. The police, often compromised or simply overwhelmed, could do little more than pick up the pieces, while the citizens lived in a constant state of uneasy dread, knowing that any street corner could become the scene of the next brutal encounter. The rivalry wasn't just personal, it was existential. Capone yearned to consolidate all of Chicago under his iron fist, and Moran, equally stubborn, refused to yield. This simmering cauldron of animosity, this relentless tit-for-tat violence, was building towards an inevitable crescendo. Every bullet fired, every life taken, every silent, clandestine meeting in a smoky back room was laying the groundwork for one of the most audacious and brutal acts in American criminal history. Chicago, a city roaring with life and shadowed by death, was holding its breath. The stage was set, the players in place, for a massacre that would forever stain the calendar, a chilling testament to the unchecked power and savage ambition of the Prohibition era's true kings.
Imagine a man whose very name whispered defiance, a ghost of an old era refusing to fade. George "Bugs" Moran wasn't just a gangster. He was a stubborn, unyielding thorn in the side of the most powerful crime lord America had ever seen, Al Capone himself. In the swirling maelstrom of Prohibition-era Chicago, where loyalty was bought with blood and empires built on illicit booze, there was a man who dared to stand against the inevitable. George Moran, known to the underworld as Bugs, a moniker that perfectly captured his unpredictable, often volatile nature, was the last bastion of the city's old guard, a direct challenge to Al Capone's relentless quest for absolute dominion. Moran wasn't born into the Irish gangland elite like some of his predecessors. He was a product of the streets, a rough-hewn brawler who clawed his way to the top of the North Side gang, inheriting the mantle from the charismatic but ultimately doomed Dean O'Banion. O'Banion's assassination, orchestrated by Capone's allies, was supposed to signal the end of the North Side's reign. It was supposed to clear the path for Capone. But O'Banion's death did something else entirely. It ignited a furious fire in Moran, transforming him from a loyal lieutenant into a bitter, relentless avenger. Under Moran's leadership, the North Side outfit became a formidable force, a stark contrast to Capone's more structured, almost corporate organization. Moran's gang was a band of hardened, loyal street fighters, a mix of Irish and Polish toughs who shared a deep-seated hatred for the Italian-American mobs of the South Side. Their headquarters, a network of speakeasies and gambling dens across Chicago's diverse north, pulsed with a defiant energy. Key figures in Moran's inner circle were men as ruthless as they were loyal. There were the Gusenberg brothers, Frank and Peter, legendary enforcers whose reputation preceded them in every dark alley and backroom poker game. Albert Koschelik, known chillingly as James Clark, was another cornerstone, a silent, deadly operator. And further down the ranks, men like Adam Heyer and Reinhard Schwimmer, each playing their part in the intricate, dangerous dance of the North Side's illicit empire. Together, they controlled a lucrative network of bootlegging operations, delivering illegal alcohol from distilleries in Canada and Michigan, challenging Capone's stranglehold on the city's most profitable trade. They ran protection rackets, extorted businesses, and managed gambling dens, all while openly flouting Capone's growing power. What set Moran apart, what truly made him Capone's ultimate target, wasn't just his criminal enterprise. It was his audacious, almost suicidal refusal to bend. While other gangs folded, paid tribute, or simply vanished, Moran stood firm. He publicly ridiculed Capone, calling him the Beast, a gutter snipe, and worse. He mocked Capone's perceived Italian-American arrogance, seeing himself as a defender of the old Irish Guard against the encroaching New Order.
This wasn't just about territory or profits. It was about pride, about a deep-seated cultural clash that simmered beneath the surface of Chicago's underworld. Moran's defiance wasn't just a business challenge, it was a personal affront, a constant chipping away at Capone's carefully cultivated image of untouchable authority. Every time Moran's men hijacked a Capone liquor truck, every time they encroached on a South Side gambling den, it was a direct challenge to Capone's manhood, his power, his very existence as Chicago's reigning king. The streets of Chicago became a bloody chessboard. The rivalry between Capone and Moran wasn't merely hostile, it was a scorched earth campaign. There were countless drive-by shootings, bombings, and public assassinations. Moran's men tried to kill Capone on several occasions, most notably a daring attempt on Cicero's Hawthorne Inn, Capone's headquarters, where over 1,000 machine gun rounds tore through the hotel, narrowly missing the crime boss. Capone, in turn, unleashed his enforcers, chipping away at Moran's ranks, but never quite breaking his spirit. Each act of violence only hardened Moran's resolve, fueling his vendetta. Capone, a man who preached loyalty and demanded subservience, could tolerate many things: competition, minor insurrections, but not open, sustained defiance. He saw Moran not just as a business rival, but as an existential threat to his carefully constructed empire. Moran represented everything Capone sought to eradicate: the unpredictable, the uncontrollable, the challenge to his ultimate authority. The very fabric of Capone's reign was built on fear and respect, and Moran systematically dismantled both with every act of rebellion. The constant warfare was costing Capone dearly, not just in money and men, but in his reputation. He couldn't truly be the undisputed king of Chicago if a pipsqueak like Bugs Moran was constantly nipping at his heels, daring to challenge him in the public eye. The humiliation was becoming unbearable. The time for subtle warnings, for minor skirmishes, was over. Capone needed a solution, a definitive, terrifying statement that would not only eliminate Moran, but send an unmistakable message to anyone else who dared to question his supreme rule. Moran, oblivious to the true scale of the storm gathering around him, remained confident, even arrogant. He believed his street smarts and the loyalty of his men would protect him, just as they always had. He never truly understood the depths of Capone's ruthlessness, the chilling precision with which the Southside boss was now planning his ultimate move. He was a bullheaded, defiant anachronism, a holdover from a bygone era, about to collide with the cold, brutal efficiency of modern organized crime. The North Side Gang, with Moran at its head, had become an intolerable cancer on Capone's vision. And for Capone, there was only one cure: total eradication.
The stage was set for an act of violence so audacious, so utterly horrifying, that it would etch itself into the darkest pages of American history, forever linking the names of Capone, Moran, and the crimson stain of St. Valentine's Day.
Capone, ever the strategist, understood that a direct assault would be too messy, too obvious, and too risky. He needed a plan, one so cunning, so utterly devoid of mercy, that it would not only eliminate Moran's top lieutenants, but also send an unequivocal message reverberating through the entire criminal underworld: defy Capone and face oblivion. The meticulously crafted design that began to take shape in the shadows was a masterpiece of deception, a symphony of cold-blooded precision that would etch itself into the annals of American crime. The cornerstone of this diabolical scheme was the element of surprise, cloaked in the very uniform of authority. The idea, audacious in its simplicity, was to don the garb of Chicago police officers. Imagine the psychological blow, to be confronted not by rival thugs, but by men seemingly cloaked in the authority of the state. It was a ruse designed to disarm, to strip away the ingrained suspicion that was a gangster's second skin, replacing it with a fleeting, fatal sense of compliance. The thought was chillingly brilliant: a fake raid, a staged crackdown on illegal liquor that would lure Moran's men into a false sense of security, believing they were merely facing a routine arrest, a temporary inconvenience before the lawyers and payoffs would set them free. But freedom was the last thing awaiting them. To execute this deception, Capone's men required authentic-looking police uniforms. How these were procured remains a point of historical speculation. Perhaps stolen from a police locker room, custom-made by a complicit tailor, or simply replicas crafted with painstaking attention to detail. What matters is the effect: the crisp blue fabric, the polished badges, the imposing caps. These weren't mere costumes, they were instruments of terror, designed to freeze their victims in place, to erase any instinct for resistance, transforming hardened killers into compliant lambs led to slaughter. The bait for this elaborate trap needed to be irresistible, something that would guarantee the presence of Moran's key players. What better lure in the heart of Prohibition than a fresh shipment of high-grade whiskey? Rumors, carefully planted and allowed to propagate through the underworld grapevine, spoke of an impending delivery of an especially valuable consignment of booze at the SMC Cartage Co. garage. This wasn't any garage. It was a known hub for Moran's operations, a place where his men regularly congregated, where their illicit cargo was stored, and where their trust was implicitly placed. The SMC Cartage Co. garage, a nondescript brick structure at 2122 North Clark Street, seemed innocent enough from the outside.
But for the architect of this impending horror, it was more than just a storage facility. It was a stage, meticulously chosen for a performance of brutal finality. Its high, unyielding walls and single entrance created a perfect choke point, a cul-de-sac of death from which there would be no escape. The dimly lit interior, often cluttered with Prohibition-era bootleg whiskey and a repair truck, offered shadows for concealment and a labyrinthine quality that could disorient even the most street-savvy gangster. Crucially, its location in a quiet residential area of Lincoln Park meant that the sounds of what was to come might be muffled, dismissed as just another rumbling delivery truck, or perhaps a routine police bust, a familiar symphony in the violent rhythm of Chicago. The plan was chilling in its precision. On the morning of February 14th, the day of St. Valentine, a carefully selected hit squad, some dressed in authentic-looking police uniforms, others in plain clothes to play the part of arrested gangsters, would arrive at the garage. The plainclothes men would pose as Moran's gang members being rounded up, lending further credence to the legitimacy of the raid. This dual disguise was a stroke of evil genius, an extra layer of deception calculated to eliminate any lingering doubt. Once inside, The police officers would order Moran's men to line up against a wall, their hands raised, facing away from their supposed captors. It was a classic police procedure, one that would have been familiar to any criminal of the era. They would be told to surrender their weapons, to cooperate, to trust in the process, a process that was in fact a death sentence. The decoy liquor truck, a crucial prop in this macabre play, would further solidify the illusion of a genuine police operation. Its presence would confirm the rumor of the whiskey delivery, providing the perfect, believable pretext for the raid. The truck was a symbol of their trade, a familiar sight, and thus utterly disarming. The target was clear: Bugs Moran and his top lieutenants. The planners envisioned a scenario where Moran himself would be present for this shipment. Whether he was merely delayed or had a premonition of danger remains one of the enduring mysteries. Nevertheless, the trap was set for him, and for anyone unlucky enough to be standing with him. Every detail, from the timing to the placement of each man, was rehearsed, mentally if not physically. The silence that would follow the initial deception, the brief moments of false security, then the unleashing of an unimaginable storm of bullets. It wasn't just murder, it was an execution, designed to be swift, brutal, and undeniably final. This meticulous planning laid the groundwork for one of the most infamous massacres in American history, a cold-blooded act of calculated extermination, born from rivalry and fueled by an insatiable lust for power. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and Chicago braced, unknowingly, for a day that would forever stain its turbulent past.
February 14th, 1929. Dawn was a slate-gray bruise spreading across the bitter Chicago sky, an omen, perhaps, for those who dared to look. In a North Side garage on North Clark Street, the air hung heavy with the smell of stale oil, exhaust fumes, and a chilling promise of something far fouler. This was the headquarters, the beating heart of George Bugs Moran's bootlegging empire, a gritty, unassuming brick structure that on this particular morning would become a tomb. Moran's men, hardened veterans of the city's ruthless Prohibition wars, were gathering, their breath frosting in the frigid air, their minds on the promised shipment of hijacked whiskey from Detroit. They arrived one by one, oblivious to the meticulously laid trap that awaited them. Each step toward the garage door was a march closer to oblivion, a final, unheeded warning from fate itself. They were about to step into a scene so brutal, so audacious, it would forever etch itself into the dark annals of American crime. Peter Gussenberg, Frank Gussenberg, James Clark, Adam Heyer, Albert Koschelik, and John May. 7 souls, all bound by their loyalty to Moran, all about to meet a horrifying, orchestrated end. The stage was set, the players in place, and the curtain about to rise on a tragedy of unparalleled savagery. The very air seemed to crackle with an unspoken dread, a premonition that only hindsight could truly comprehend. The city, still slumbering, was utterly unaware that just a few blocks away, history was about to be rewritten in blood. The chill biting at their cheeks was nothing compared to the ice that would soon grip their hearts. Around 10:30 a.m., a large, dark Cadillac sedan, designed to resemble a police squad car, screeched to a halt outside the garage. From its doors emerged 4 figures, 2 in full Chicago police uniforms, complete with badges and billy clubs, and 2 more in civilian clothes, overcoats concealing their deadly intentions. They moved with an air of unquestionable authority, a chilling efficiency that belied the horror they were about to unleash. Inside, the men in the garage saw the uniforms, and a collective sigh of resigned frustration, perhaps even relief, might have swept through them. A raid, annoying but routine. They'd been through this before.
No one would resist the police. That was a cardinal rule, a code of conduct in their dangerous world. Compliance was the path to survival, to a possible bribe, a quick release, or at worst, a brief stint in jail. They had no way of knowing this was no ordinary raid. This was an execution disguised as law enforcement. The two uniformed men, their faces grim and unyielding, strode purposefully into the garage, their eyes sweeping over the unsuspecting targets. "All right, fellas, line up against the wall. This is a raid." The command echoed, firm and unwavering. The men, still nursing the morning chill and the anticipation of their liquor delivery, obeyed without question. They raised their hands, turning their backs to the perceived officers, their faces pressed against the cold, grimy brick of the wall. Their eyes, wide and bewildered, perhaps darted to the large truck inside, filled with the very whiskey they were waiting for. They didn't see the chilling glint of metal from the plainclothes men as they moved in. They didn't hear the ominous clicks as the heavy weaponry was prepared.
Their final moments were spent in the obedient posture of surrender, a horrifying testament to the perfect, deadly deception. They were lambs, led to slaughter, their trust in the uniform tragically misplaced. And then, the silence shattered. Not with a warning, not with a shout, but with an explosive, deafening roar that ripped through the garage like a thunderclap from hell itself. Two Thompson submachine guns, their muzzles spitting fire, erupted in a cacophony of destruction, joined by the thunderous boom of two shotguns. The very air vibrated with the savage rhythm of death. Hundreds of rounds tore through the small space, a deadly torrent of lead designed to obliterate. Splintered wood flew, glass shattered, and plaster exploded from the walls as the bullets ripped through flesh and bone. The men, still lined against the wall, were instantly transformed from living beings into grotesque bleeding effigies, their bodies contorted, convulsed, and crumpled in a horrifying ballet of agony. Each bullet was an exclamation mark on their final, desperate moments. The stench of cordite, thick and metallic, instantly filled the air, mingling with the coppery tang of fresh blood. Screams, guttural and choked, were swallowed by the relentless chatter of the machine guns. This wasn't a warning shot. It was an absolute cold-blooded annihilation. The killers, emotionless and efficient, continued to pour bullets into the already falling forms, ensuring there would be no survivors, no witnesses to contradict their meticulously crafted alibi. Frank Gusenberg, riddled with 14 bullets, miraculously clung to life, a testament to the sheer volume of fire he endured. But even his incredible will could not outrun the inevitable. The floor, once merely stained with oil, is now a slick, glistening canvas of crimson, a testament to the immense, brutal force unleashed. This was not a gunfight. It was an execution, a calculated, savage act of extermination designed to send a chilling message to anyone who dared to cross Al Capone. The sheer audacity, the methodical brutality, the absolute lack of remorse, it all underscored the horrifying reality of gangland justice in Prohibition-era Chicago. Every single bullet was aimed, every single life intentionally snuffed out. There was no mercy, no hesitation, only the cold hard logic of vengeance and dominance. The sustained firing lasted for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was mere seconds, a concentrated burst of absolute horror. When the weapons finally fell silent, an eerie, profound quiet descended upon the garage, broken only by the whimpers of Frank Gusenberg and the agonized cries of a dog, high in its cage, a silent witness to the carnage. Smoke, thick and acrid, hung heavy in the air, swirling around the crumpled, lifeless forms that littered the blood-soaked concrete floor. The silence was more terrifying than the din of the guns, a chilling testament to the finality of the act. Without a word, the policemen and their civilian accomplices turned and marched out, maintaining their stoic composure.
The two men in uniform even carried what appeared to be empty weapons, further reinforcing the illusion of a legitimate raid. creating the perfect alibi. They calmly entered the waiting Cadillac and drove away, vanishing into the mundane morning traffic of North Clark Street. The street, just moments before a scene of unimaginable horror, returned to its routine, unaware of the butchery that had just occurred behind the unassuming brick facade. The perpetrators had melted away, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable devastation, a question mark hanging heavy in the air, and a city about to be plunged into a state of shocked disbelief. The immediate aftermath was a gruesome tableau. Peter Gusenberg and 6 others shot down in cold blood, their bodies mangled beyond recognition, their lives brutally extinguished. Only Frank Gusenberg, astonishingly, was still alive, whispering his final defiant words, "No one shot me," taking his loyalty to his grave. This horrific act, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed, would send shockwaves far beyond the gritty streets of Chicago. It was a declaration, a brutal testament to the unchecked power of the criminal underworld, and a stark, horrifying reminder of the lengths to which men would go for dominance in the illicit empires of Prohibition. The massacre was over, but its dark shadow would stretch across decades, leaving behind an enduring mystery, an unpunished crime, and a legacy of terror that continues to captivate and appall.
Imagine a city paralyzed not just by fear, but by a deafening silence. A silence born from the barrel of a machine gun, echoing through the blood-stained walls of a forgotten garage on Chicago's North Side. February 14th, 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 men mowed down in a brutal ballet of bullets, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable carnage. But if the crime itself was a horrifying spectacle, a cinematic nightmare unfolding in broad daylight, the aftermath, the desperate, chaotic scramble for justice, would prove to be an even more tragic drama. It was a tangled web of blind alleys, whispered threats, political machinations, and ultimately, an unsolved puzzle that continues to haunt the annals of American crime. A stark illustration of how easily justice can be derailed when pitted against overwhelming power and an unyielding code of silence. When the first officers, drawn by the chilling reports of relentless machine gun fire, finally breached the doors of the SMC Cartage Company garage at 2122 North Clark Street, they were met not just with death, but with an almost theatrical display of underworld power. The air, thick with the metallic tang of blood and spent gunpowder, hung heavy over a scene that defied immediate comprehension. Bodies twisted into grotesque poses lay strewn across the concrete floor, a macabre tableau beneath the dim winter light that filtered through grime-streaked windows. Frank Gusenberg, riddled with bullets, incredibly still clung to life, his final agonizing breath a defiant refusal to name his attackers, a chilling testament to the code of silence already clamping down. Dr. Herman Bundenson, the Cook County coroner, a man well acquainted with Chicago's brutal underbelly, famously described the scene. The bodies of the victims literally filled the garage. They were slumped against the wall, some lying face down, others on their backs, all with multiple bullet wounds. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a meticulously planned, coldly calculated extermination. The city's finest, accustomed to the grit and grime of gangland skirmishes, were nevertheless stunned. This was different. This was an outright declaration of war, a brazen challenge to law and order, and the sheer scale of the violence sent shivers down the spine of even the most hardened detective. But the perpetrators, those phantom figures in stolen police uniforms, had vanished as swiftly and silently as they appeared, leaving behind a scene drenched in blood but eerily devoid of direct, actionable clues. No fingerprints on the infamous Thompson submachine guns or the sawed-off shotguns that had unleashed such devastation. No clear, credible eyewitnesses willing to risk their lives. The underworld, a shadow government unto itself, closed ranks with terrifying efficiency. Fear, a far more effective deterrent than any prison cell, gripped the city's working-class neighborhood.
To speak out, to even whisper a name that might connect the masked killers to their masters, was to sign one's own death warrant, to invite a brutal reprisal that few dared to contemplate. Bugsy Moran, the man everyone knew was the intended target, publicly scoffed at the dead, dismissive, defiant, yet privately terrified. "Only Capone kills like that," he'd allegedly muttered, a stark accusation veiled in public denial, betraying the deeper truth. The police found themselves pushing against a wall of silence so formidable, so absolute, that every lead seemed to crumble to dust. Every potential witness evaporated into the city's murky depths. It wasn't just a lack of evidence, it was an active, pervasive conspiracy of silence, enforced by the very real threat of violent reprisal, turning the entire city into an unwilling accomplice. The massacre wasn't merely a local outrage, it was a national disgrace, a glaring symbol of Prohibition's bloody failures and the spiraling anarchy it unleashed. President Herbert Hoover, incensed by the brazen lawlessness that mocked federal authority, famously declared, "I want those men found and punished." This wasn't merely a presidential directive, it was a public shaming of Chicago, a city whose name had become synonymous with Al Capone and his ruthless empire. The fledgling Bureau of Investigation, the precursor to the FBI, was thrown into the fray, its ambitious director, J. Edgar Hoover, seizing on the case as a means to expand federal power and jurisdiction. While their initial mandate focused more on tax evasion and prohibition violations than direct murder investigation, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre provided a powerful justification for a more assertive federal role in combating organized crime. Meanwhile, Chicago's mayor, Big Bill Thompson, a man whose political fortunes were deeply intertwined with the city's vast and often violent vice economy, found himself caught in a maelstrom of public and political condemnation. Accusations of corruption, of turning a blind eye to gang activity, of effectively enabling the very bloodshed that stained the city's reputation, rained down upon his administration. The political pressure was immense, a cacophony of demands for justice that resonated from the marble halls of Washington, D.C. to the most humble street corners of Chicago. But even this national outcry struggled against the impenetrable fortress of the underworld. The investigation, despite its high-profile nature and the combined efforts of local and federal agencies, descended into a frustrating labyrinth of blind alleys, false leads, and dead ends. Suspects emerged. Fred Burke, alias Killer Burke, a cold-blooded enforcer known for his ruthlessness, was a prime candidate. A machine gun, later recovered from his Michigan hideout, was ballistically linked to the massacre, confirming it was one of the murder weapons. Yet Burke was never tried for the St. Valentine's Day killings. He was convicted for the murder of a police officer in Missouri, an entirely separate crime that simply put him behind bars, taking one of the likely triggermen off the streets, but without ever truly solving this specific case in the eyes of the law. The actual policemen who pulled the triggers, the anonymous faces behind the uniforms, remained exactly that, anonymous. Al Capone, the undisputed orchestrator, the man whose strategic brilliance and ruthless ambition had engineered this bloody purge, remained utterly untouchable for this particular crime. He had been safely ensconced in his luxurious Florida villa, meticulously orchestrating his alibi with the same cold precision he planned the massacre itself. The legal system, designed to secure justice and uphold order, found itself frustratingly powerless against an enemy that operated beyond its conventional reach, an enemy that controlled witnesses with terror, manipulated the system with corrupt influence, and understood the art of evasion better than any prosecutor.
The initial flurry of activity, the passionate promises of retribution, slowly faded into the grim, chilling reality of an unsolved case. No one, not a single individual, was ever convicted for the actual murders committed on February 14, 1929. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre remains, to this day, a chilling testament to the impunity that organized crime could command, a stark reminder that even the most heinous acts can sometimes escape the long arm of the law, leaving behind only the cold, haunting echo of an unpunished crime, a wound on the soul of a nation that refused to heal.
The screams faded, the blood pooled, and in the chilling silence that descended upon that North Clark Street garage on February 14, 1929, an echo was born. An echo that would reverberate through the annals of American crime, shaping legends and casting a shadow of enduring silence that lingers to this very day. It wasn't just a massacre, it was a seismic event, a brutal exclamation point in the violent ledger of Prohibition-era Chicago, one that would etch itself into the collective memory of a nation and forever redefine the image of its most infamous gangster. This was the unpunished legacy of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Al Capone, though miles away in Florida, surrounded by a carefully constructed alibi and the sunshine of Miami, immediately became the spectral presence haunting the scene. Even without a single shred of direct evidence, the public, the press, and virtually every law enforcement agency knew who was ultimately responsible. The sheer audacity, the cold, calculating precision, the military-grade firepower, it all screamed Capone. He was already a force to be reckoned with, but this act of unparalleled barbarity transformed him. He transcended mere criminal. He became a mythical figure, a bogeyman in a bespoke suit, the undisputed overlord of Chicago's underworld. His name, once whispered in fear, was now bellowed in headlines across the globe, solidifying his image as the ruthless, untouchable emperor of crime, a man who would stop at nothing to eliminate his rivals. The massacre wasn't just a victory for Capone, it was a coronation, albeit one bathed in blood and infamy. His denials, his feigned outrage, only added to the mystique, weaving a narrative of a man so powerful, so cunning, he could orchestrate mass murder from 1,000 miles away and emerge unscathed. The impact on organized crime was immediate and profound. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre wasn't merely a gangland shooting, it was a public declaration of war, a brutal lesson delivered with machine gun fire. It shocked even the hardened denizens of the underworld, demonstrating a level of violence and strategic execution previously unimaginable. It signaled a new era of consolidation, where ruthless efficiency and overwhelming force dictated territory and power. Smaller outfits either pledged fealty or vanished. The era of loose alliances was over, replaced by a more centralized, terrifyingly efficient criminal empire, with Capone at its undisputed head. Beyond the immediate consolidation of power, the massacre also inadvertently sparked a federal awakening. While local law enforcement struggled, often hampered by corruption or sheer intimidation, the sheer horror of the event caught the attention of Washington.
It provided further impetus for the burgeoning federal war on organized crime, signaling that this was no longer just a local problem, but a national crisis demanding a more robust, centralized response. The Bureau of Investigation, later the FBI, began to sharpen its teeth, realizing that the conventional tools of justice were insufficient against an enemy that openly mocked them. Yet, for all its notoriety, for all the global headlines and the public certainty, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre remains, officially, an unsolved crime. 7 men butchered in cold blood, and not a single person was ever convicted for their murders. How could this be?
The reasons are a complex tangle of challenges inherent to the Prohibition era. Key witnesses were scarce, and those who might have seen something were quickly silenced, either by fear or by the very same forces that orchestrated the massacre. Police, though they quickly identified the killers as members of Capone's crew, struggled to gather the unassailable evidence needed for a conviction. They found the death car, a Cadillac, and traced it, but linking specific individuals to the actual pulling of the triggers proved impossible in a courtroom. The discovery of the Thompson submachine guns, later connected to Fred Burke, a known Capone accusate, provided a tantalizing lead. Burke, a ruthless killer, was indeed eventually arrested for an unrelated murder of a police officer, and the ballistic evidence from his recovered weapons matched the bullets from the massacre. Yet, even with this crucial link, the legal labyrinth of prosecuting such a complex, politically charged crime meant Burke was never tried for the massacre itself. The web of complicity, the layers of deniability built around Capone, and the sheer difficulty of penetrating an organization built on fear and silence left justice blindfolded and impotent. It stands as a dark stain on American legal history, a testament to a time when criminal power could quite literally get away with murder on the grandest scale. The enduring silence around the massacre isn't just the silence of the grave for 7 victims. It's the silence of unpunished perpetrators, the silence of a system overwhelmed, and the chilling silence that comes from knowing a definitive answer may never emerge. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre lives on, not just as a historical event, but as a cautionary tale, a brutal symbol of lawlessness that captured an era and continues to fascinate and horrify. Its myths and legends persist, woven into the fabric of Chicago's dark past and America's fascination with its criminal underworld. The ghostly tableau of men against a brick wall, the phantom machine guns, the unwritten code of silence, all these elements ensure that while the men who pulled the triggers might be long gone, the echoes of their unpunished crime will continue to reverberate, a chilling reminder that some mysteries, no matter how infamous, are destined to remain forever unsolved.